Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Yenny, and I'm going to go through 3.1, simulating a probability situation. This is the problem where you are working with 1-and-1 free throw shots. Remember, a 1-and-1 free throw situation works like this. You get one shot to begin with, and if you make that shot, you get a second shot. If you don't make the first shot, then you don't get a second shot. So we're going to work with Nishi, who is a 60% free throw shooter. And the question A is asking us just to make a prediction. Is it more likely, do we think, for Nishi to score 0, 1, or 2 points in this situation? So again, she's a 60% shooter. And I would say the vast majority of kids say this. Each year I have kids predict, and I'm going to actually ask you to predict and tell me what your prediction was before doing this problem. And most kids predict that Nishi won't walk away having scored 1 point from that free throw situation, as 1 being the most likely, they believe, is the most likely result. So I'm not going to make my prediction since I've figured this probability before, but I'd like you again to make sure that you tell me what your prediction was. So then in part B you had to use this spinner here, and notice that the spinner is separated into 60% hit and 40% miss because Nishi is a 60% free throw shooter, which means she makes 60% of her shots. So you're going to use this spinner to help you kind of simulate this probability situation. And I've done this already 16 times, and I'm going to do it, actually I've done it 20 times already. I'm going to do it 5 more times so that you can kind of see what I'm doing here. So I spin and I got a hit that time. That means she made her first shot. So I get a second shot, which is a hit, 2 points. So that's a miss. Now if you miss on the first shot, you don't get a second shot. So there she scored 0 points. Do you see how that's different than, say, a 2-shot situation in a free throw contest? That's a hit, so she gets a second shot, and that's a miss. So then she walked away making 1 point there. Hit. So she gets a second shot and makes a hit. A miss, and so she doesn't get a second shot, so she has 0. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to analyze my experimental probability. The experimental probability that I found for making 0 points, I'm just going to count all my zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 8 out of 25, and 8 out of 25 is about 32%. Probability of scoring 1 point, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 25. And that's about 40%. And my probability of scoring 2 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of 25, which of course is going to be 1/5, which of course is going to be 20%. Okay, so in my experimental probability, I found that the most likely outcome was 1 point. And now what we're going to do is we're going to analyze the situation from a theoretical probability standpoint by making an area model. Because realize here, I only made how many attempts here? 25. So I only have 25, which is a fairly small number. So we're going to analyze theoretically what we would expect to happen and then compare that to what actually happened. Alright, so notice that the area model here is a 10 by 10 grid. And I'm using that because I want my results to basically be out of 100 tries. So when she says she's a 60% free throw average, that basically means 60 times out of 100 she would make it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to separate my area model into 60-40. And the 60 side represents, and I'm going to draw a little smiley face right here, she has a 60% chance, this much of the area model, to make it, and a 40% chance of missing it. But remember, in this situation, if you miss it, you don't get a second shot. So if you miss it, you automatically have earned 0 points. But if you make it, remember what happens. If you make it, you get a second shot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my area model. I'm going to separate it again 60-40 to represent, again, that she has a 60% chance of making that second shot and a 40% chance of missing. So in this section here, I want you to think about what happened. First she made it, then she missed it. So this represents the chance of earning 1 point. And this section represents that she made it, and she made it again. So this section represents that she made 2 points in this situation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find the probability of each of these sections. So the probability of scoring 0 points is this entire section of the area model, and that's because remember that if you miss it, you don't get a second shot. So that's 40%. The probability of scoring 1 point in this case is 24%, and the probability of scoring 2 points is 36%. Okay, that's question D. And of course I did that by simply just finding the area of this section out of my 100 grid. Alright, in question E, you had to figure out how would that affect the outcome if Nishi actually had a 70% average instead of a 60% free throw average. So what we're going to do is we're just going to adjust our area model a little bit. This time she has a 70% chance of making her first shot, and so I'm going to again indicate that this section represents that she made it with a smiley face, and this section represents that she missed it. This is still a 1-in-1 free throw situation, so if she misses it, she still has earned 0 points. But if she's made it, she's earned her chance at a second shot. So we're going to separate the second shot 70-30 as well. 70% chance of making it and 30% chance of not making it. So this section right here represents that she made it and she missed. This section represents that she made it and she made it again. So let's see how that affects the probability. Now the probability of 0 points is, of course, 30%. It's this entire section. The probability of 1 point would be, this is 7 times 3, that'd be 21%. And the probability of scoring 2 points is 49%. So look what happened here. So when she's a 60% shooter, the most likely thing to happen is right here, scoring 0 points. Think about that for a second based on what you predicted at the beginning. Did you predict that the most likely outcome would actually be 0? And that's actually what it ended up being here. The most likely outcome for a 60% shooter is to score 0 points after walking away from the free throw situation. But if you have a 70% average, the most likely thing to happen is to score 2 points. So that's pretty significant from a probability standpoint. All right, question F, the last one here. How does the area model help us predict how many times she'll score 2 points in 100 attempts or in 200 attempts? Well, since we already converted all of these to our percentages, we're just going to go back to those percentages. This tells us that 36 times out of 100 she will score 2 points. So I can double that for 200 attempts and say that 72 times out of 200 she would score 2 points. And then of course the same thing applies over here. This would tell us, this percentage here, would tell us that 49 times out of 100 she would score 2 points, or 98 times out of 200 she would score 2 points. All right, go ahead and move on to 3.2 when you're ready, because we're going to apply this same problem, 3.1, to expected value, which is basically taking these free throw percentages and applying them to this long-term average. So if you have any questions about this, make sure that you ask before going on to 3.2. Thanks for listening, everybody.